I've got a fairly short presentation because I wasn't entirely sure whether everybody in here was going to be on the same page or not. So I'll go through what I've got, and I want to leave a lot of time for folks to ask questions and make observations, because I'm sure you all have a lot you could say to each other that, you know, I don't really know coming from a journalist standpoint. What I will say, though, I remember when I signed up for my Twitter handle, I think it was 2006 or 7, and a friend of mine said, it said, oh, there's this new thing called Twitter, and you should sign up for it. And I did. And then like a year later, I had still done nothing with it, because it just seemed like a solution in search of a problem at the time, you know? And then all of a sudden, it's sort of, people showed up and it sort of took off. And here in North Carolina, I mean, it's become, for those of us who work in the State House, it's become like our version of the wire, of the news wire. You know, people talk to each other, they pass information on it. You know, we literally couldn't do our jobs without having Twitter around to sort of keep us up to date on what was happening in different parts of the buildings that are the government complex. So I am a true convert. Can't believe I ever doubted it, but there you go. But anyway, so this is all about getting from that, what do I do with that thing, to how do I use it better? And forgive the puns, I minimized the puns in this, but I couldn't resist one in the title. As you notice, there's 2 handles there, and I'll kind of explain that in a minute. I started tweeting as @LauraLeslie. And that was what I tweeted at when I was working at WNC, which is our local NPR affiliate here in Chapel Hill. And it wasn't really a station-sponsored thing. It was just sort of, I wanted to do it. So I ended up with a lot of followers. And then I took this job at RAL, and they're like, well, we're going to invent this whole new sort of web depot for political information called NC Capital. So why don't you just do it all over again? Build it all over again. So that's what happened. So it was a little different than trying to build from the ground up, because I already had a following sort of in another, you know, as another sort of persona, but trying to port people over and get people to sort of respond and react to the new brand, NC Capital, which I occasionally share with some other people, but which most of the time I'm stuck with, it was a learning experience, actually. And so a few of the things that I've got to contribute is what I learned from this. Number one, how many of you are using tags on a regular basis? Okay. If you're not using tags, you're not maximizing the number of people seeing your tweets. Because what tags are, they're the hashtag something, right? Some people use them for ironic statements about the news, but they actually are useful if you learn the tags in your area. They're actually very useful for people who may not be following you, but who may be following a tag. So one example for that, for me, was NCGA. That's our tag for North Carolina General Assembly. It's also, unfortunately, the National Corn Growers Association, and that has been a bitter fight for the last couple of years. But every now and then there's something about crop yields. It's like, what? Yeah. But those tags, you know, a lot of people weren't following me necessarily, and NC Capital was brand new as of the beginning of 2011. But they were following the tag. And so when somebody is following a tag and has that up on one of their searches, on their columns in TweetDeck, or, you know, however you prefer to, whatever app you like to use, then they see you, and that's how they follow you. That's how they come to know you. That's one big way to do it, and it's been really huge here in North Carolina. And I know a lot of y'all, like especially at NCDOT, will use like I-40 or something like that. But I'm encouraging you to get out of the DOT tags and get into news tags. Get into place tags, like when people are talking about your particular home city, is there a tag that they use a lot? One of my favorite tags from a couple of years ago was Snowmageddon. Remember, people were all talking to each other during the big snowstorm? Now that's kind of a long tag, but anybody who was trying to talk to the people who were following Snowmageddon would be talking to exactly the people you probably might want to talk to about emergency preparations and services and disasters and shelters, right? Even if they weren't following the DOT necessarily. So, cannot overstate the importance of tags. Number 2, real-time info in layman's terms. This is a lesson I learned talking about legislation, but it also applies to you. Both lanes close at mile marker 273. Your average person in the car doesn't know what mile marker 273 is, right? They know what a city is. They know what a town is. That's the same thing I went through when I would talk about legislation. In my old Twitterverse world, I used to talk to basically a bunch of political geeks who knew if I wrote S890 what that meant. Going to work at NC Capital and having more followers that were from outside of the political world, I found that I had to rethink, not dumb down, but simply be more clear about what I was talking about in order for people to understand it. And I think that's something to keep in mind, like I said, as you're offering this information. Think about the way that people are using this information. They're catching it at their desk maybe, or maybe they're on their mobile phone. More than likely, they're on their mobile phone. They may be in a car, on a train or something. They're not going to have, they're not necessarily going to have the ability to quickly find out what mile marker on what highway will mean to them necessarily. And they may not go look it up. And then that's a wasted tweet. You know what I mean? That's eyeballs that you didn't really impact. Promoting your coverage across platforms. This is really important because I find out all the time that such and such organization or such group has a Twitter feed, and it's like, gee, I had no idea. All the ways that you communicate should be communicated in all the ways you communicate, right? Your Facebook page should have a link to your Twitter and a link to your website. Your website should have a link to your Twitter. And actually, I'll show you after I'm done, like what we do with it on WRL. We actually have a crawl for all the WRL Twitter, so people can go to the page and see not just, hey, they have a Twitter icon, but hey, here's what I'm gonna get if I sign up for this. It's a fairly easy app to set up on your page, and it lets people kind of get a sense of why they might want to follow you instead of taking your word for it that you want to follow us, right? For us, it was helpful to promote it on TV and online, to let people know that the feed was there. And that helped to draw a lot of followers too. We went from 0 to 5,000 in about 18 months, and I mean that's not bad for a political feed, state politics. But that really helped to let people know to go look for it because a lot of people don't necessarily just go looking on Twitter. Don't just tweet, curate information. This one I think is essential. A lot of people, and I'll say this again later, a lot of people get on Twitter and kind of all they do is they'll tell you what they're doing today. They'll send you a press release. They'll talk about an event. That's great information to have, but it doesn't necessarily make me want to follow that person. If you're actually passing along relevant news stories, passing along little nuggets of information, as Dara was talking about in other states, if it's more conversational, if it's more informative, and it's not just a sort of an auto feed of your press releases, it's going to get a lot more play, and people are going to pay a lot more attention to it. Always reply to questions, and I think that's so important, especially for you. I'm sure you guys get a lot more questions than I do, but and you probably get absolutely deluged with them. But that is really one of the best ways to grow your audience. I can't believe how surprised people are when you reply to them on Twitter. And they're like, wow, that was fast, thank you. And it's like, well, you're talking to me, you added me, it came up. But it's always good to do that because that's establishing that two-way communication. And one more tip for growing your audience. Teasers, and that's a news business term, but it's kind of like we talk about when you see the promo in your news for the story coming up in a little while. We don't actually tell you exactly what the story is. We tell you something that's going to make you want to sit through those commercials that pay our bills and then watch the story. Set the table. So if you're doing a story, don't just sort of put the blah headline, $60 million federal funding for such and such highway extension. Learn to write something that's going to make people want to click on that, right? Big money coming to your state, where's it going to go? Something that will drive people to go to your website, get your eyeballs, and make you interesting, as opposed to another press release. Getting retweeted, do unto others. This is so true. It's true in so many ways on the, when it comes to the web. I mean, people don't link to you unless you link to them. When it comes to retweeting, the best way to get retweeted is either to have information that nobody else has, which we'll talk about in a minute, or retweet other people's information when it's good. Why are you going to write a tweet that says the same thing as somebody else that is a credible source? And you have to be careful who you retweet, right? But is a credible source, just retweet it, and that helps to build sort of your status. They're going to pay attention to the fact that you retweeted them. It helps. Have a voice. That's another big one.